Okay, so we're out to this deck. It's dried for a couple days and we're ready to stain it. We're gonna quick do a moisture meter test. We're looking for under 15%. As far as moisture goes on a deck, you want it to be under 15%. Sometimes the floor, because of dew or whatever, it might be sitting at 17 or 18% when you get out here, but the spindles, all the railings, that'll probably take about 5 hours to stain. Those will be under 15% because it's a vertical surface and water wasn't sitting on top of it. So you can start staining the vertical surfaces, and then by the time you get to the floor, it'll be dry enough for stain application because it's had 5 or 6 hours to dry out in the hot sun. So I'll just show you how to operate the moisture meter. So basically it has 2 prongs that you stick into the wood and an on switch. And we're just going to go over to the wood here and stick it in there. And that's sitting at 14%, so that's good. 13%, so we're good on the floor. That's pretty much all you have to do for the moisture meter. And then as far as the stain application, you know, it's a lot more important that the wood is dry enough when you stain it under 15%. And then if you get a nice hot day and you stain your deck and say it rains an hour later, that's okay in 90% of cases because the stain's had a chance to kind of soak in and grab on, and then it penetrates the water that any water that rains on it. But if it happens, say 15-20 minutes after you do your stain application and water sits on your deck, you may find rings. It's not that it's washing away the stain, it's that it's separating it. It would separate the oil, the water will, and it'll create just like watermarks. So that's kind of what happens in that scenario. And if that happens, you can kind of repair it by just taking stain on like a rag and just wiping that surface and trying to rub it out. And if it doesn't really work, if you're not getting it out, then you may just have to like sand specific boards, or a worst case scenario is you have to strip off, say, the floor and redo the floor if that happens. But this deck is going to get sanded, so we are going to get the job site set up and get the floor and top rail sanded before we apply the stain. Okay, so we're getting set up for the stain application. How you want to set up the job site is try to get everything on one drop cloth. Ideally, you put it underneath the deck or on some rocks or something like that, because you're going to be maybe pouring some thinner or mixing stuff, and not only that, but having a drop cloth over a surface that you don't have to worry about it burning out the grass. If a drop cloth will sit on one spot for any length of period of time, it could burn out the grass. So you want to put it over rocks or underneath the deck or something like that if you can help it. If you do have to put it over vegetation, grass or whatever, you probably just want to move that drop cloth after say 2 or 3 hours so that that section of grass has a chance to breathe. So we haven't set up this job site completely. We just kind of got all our tools back here located on the drop cloth underneath here. We still have to get this deck sanded, and then we're going to mask off the side of the house there, and then we're going to place our drop cloths down underneath. Here's some of the equipment that we need to get set up for. Not a ton of stuff, but we have our stain brushes. So we keep our deck stain brushes into a 1 gallon in a 5 gallon bucket. We have some stir sticks there, and then store the brushes in here with some thinner, and we have a couple of other brushes in here, and then we just seal that up. And we have a box of rags here, our paint thinner, our stain. We're using TWP dark oak on this deck. We have a ladder hook. We have our 5-inch Makita hand sanders for like the stairs of the top rail. We have a handmasker for the siding where the rails meet up. And then we just have 2 extensions for when we do the floor. We screw the deck stain brushes into these extensions for staining the floor. A tool right here that's used to level out the ground when we're using a ladder. Our moisture meter, some tape, and then we're sanding this deck, so we have our red pads that go on the 12x18 sander, and then we have some 80 grit paper right here that we're going to put on there. We also set out just a garbage bag for when we need it, a couple extension cords for the 5-inch sanders, and then a leaf blower for after we get done sanding, we'll blow off the deck. And then we have all our drop cloths right there. I always set up a drop cloth on the deck to avoid spots. You know, if you have drips on the deck as you're staining, it'll spot because you're not going to come back to stain the floor for a while. So you want to use the drop cloth on the deck itself. And then you want to have like 2 or 3 drop cloths around here, kind of moving yourself around as you're doing the outside, so you don't get stained on the rocks. And then get it all set up underneath the deck when you do the floor. So that's kind of how we get the job site set. Okay, we're ready to get started with staining. These had been pre-shaken when we picked them up at the store this morning, but we always stir them as well. So right before you stain, even if you come down here, you get more stain when you're doing the floor or whatever, always mix it because the stuff settles pretty quickly. So I'll get the top opened up here. We want to make sure that we don't have so much stain, like it's too full that it's hard to actually work with. More so for the person on the outside, because they're going to be using the stain on a ladder with a hook, and if it's too full it could tip. Not only that, but your brush is going to be sitting inside your stain. So while it's sitting inside the stain, it's going to get really wet. So you really want to only have the bristles sitting in about that much of stain, so that it's not constantly like oversaturated. So what I'll do here is get these mixed up. We're using TWP dark oak for this deck. So our 2 most common colors are TWP dark oak and pecan. And the TWP stain is probably one of the most common stains that we use. It's just a really easy to apply stain. It's easy to maintain in the future for the customer or for us if we come back to maintain it. You can see that there's a little bit of pigment down there, so it doesn't take long for that to settle. So we're getting that all mixed up. And what I'm going to do is go back to the truck and grab another 1 gallon here and pour some of this excess into a gallon so that we only have about that much stain in the buckets to work with. And then we'll get set up and get started. Alright. Okay. Alright, so I'm pouring some of this excess stain into a 1 gallon can right here to make sure that I have the right amount to get started. And we have our brushes here that are sitting in thinner, so you take the brush out of the thinner, get it squeezed out here. Make sure that there's not any thinner in there already stained. And then just take a rag here, get this brush cleaned out. I'd say one of these deck stain brushes probably lasts about 2 months. We're about halfway through the summer right now, so these brushes are ready to get replaced, ready to get some new brushes, and then those brushes should last the rest of the summer. So I'm going to pour a little bit more of this out. It's kind of what I'm looking for. Oh, it's a little bit too much. Okay, so I'd want about that much stain to work with. At least for the person on a ladder. They can set the brush like that as they're working to make sure it doesn't dip all the way in there, because if you store the brush all the way in there and then try to work with it, it's just going to be too much material. You're going to constantly have to go like this, versus if you're just kind of getting the tip, that's all you really want to get in there, is about that much of the bristles before you start working with it. So you can see that these drop cloths have like a plastic sheet over the canvas, so it kind of seals it out. But I would want to just clean this up, and ideally this would not be over the top of like an expensive stained concrete or anything like that. You would want to maybe put it over some rocks, but you want to check to make sure that this isn't seeping through the drop cloth onto the concrete underneath. Maybe if there's like a hole in the plastic sheet that would seal this out. But the drop cloth that you use as kind of your layout or whatever shouldn't be just a completely canvas drop cloth, because the stain will soak through that sheet. You want to use a drop cloth that's made for sealing out like thin liquids, like an oil, where there's actually like a latex shell to it or a plastic shell to it, so stains can't soak through it and penetrate it. So we're going to get the area set up and ready for us to stain. So basically what we're going to do is run 2 rows of 4x15 drop cloths, 4x15, 4x12, just to make sure that when we're on a ladder, this is a really calm day, but it might be a little bit windy. and if the wind catches that stain, it'll blow it around. So you want to have enough of an area covered where if it does blow it, it's still going to be covered. This area, we've just put some 0.3 mil poly over the top of this because these plants right here are really delicate. If we put these heavier weighted canvas drop cloths over them, it might flatten them out, might break them a little bit. So we're going to be try to be careful. And what we'll probably do actually is, for the time being, kind of let this open so the plants can breathe. And then when we get to it, cover it up. And then once we're past this section, we'll just take the plastic off so it doesn't burn the plants out. And then over here, we're going to start on this side of the deck, this corner on the railing. We're going to have two people working side by side on the railings all the way around, and then do the stairs. We mask off the house right here, again, because sometimes the stain is so thin, it'll release from the brush and it'll blow and it might get on the siding. Now you can take a rag, this is oil-based, this specific stain is oil-based. You can take a rag with some thinner and clean it off relatively easily. You'd also want to take water and clean off the spot that you cleaned with thinner, because otherwise it'll leave kind of some residue behind. So first clean it with thinner and then clean it with water. But this is just to take extra precaution to make sure that, you know, if any stain does end up on here, it's going to hit the plastic. Once we're done with this section, we'll just tear it off. This doesn't have to be super neat and pretty. We want to leave a little bit of room here so we can get in here with a smaller stain brush and get like that corner and stuff. So we're not taping it off tight there. So if any stain did get on the siding there, we would just go ahead and clean it off. So I'll show you kind of how that works up here. So here's a hand masker. We have 72-inch plastic on here. It's the 3M hand masker plastic. We have the Sherwin, it's a high adhesion tape. It's just gonna be on the surface for a couple hours, so high adhesion's fine. We just have another roll of tape for tacking the plastic on. So, and you want to make sure that you have the plastic blade on here so it can rip the plastic. So I'm gonna start probably about here. And then when I tear it, I'm gonna kind of put pressure down like this and rip it. And then go ahead and get this put around the side right here. And how that works is it's just folded into itself, so you kind of just pull it down. And then you'd want to get it tucked in behind this railing right here. Bring it down. And then I'll tack it. I'm not trying to seal it on there, I just want to make sure it doesn't move. So I'll just tack this in this corner right here. And then you'll be working with another person, and the other person on the outside is going to unravel that, tack it down, and then I'll go back down here. Kind of show what the other person would be doing that you're going to be working with. So yeah, you're gonna have another person working with you here. We're gonna bring the plastic down, get it tacked, and then the person on the outside would probably be the most likely to actually have their stand get caught in the wind or whatever and blow up on the side of the house. But then you want to also mask it off underneath here. Start right about here. go ahead and bring this down. And then tack this up in a couple of spots here. So in this surface right here, this gutter and everything, you want to keep an eye on it. You don't, I mean, we can just take this out. You put a drop cloth over the top of it. It may crack, you may dent it. So, okay, this one's screwed in right here. So I'll probably leave that attached, but I'm going to put a drop cloth over this when I'm ready to do it. And just remember that it's right there so that even though it's not covered up with drop cloth, you step on it and you dent it right here. So be careful of that, but yeah, that'll be covered up with a drop cloth, and we're ready to get started here. So as I'm sanding the railings, I'm gonna hit the top rail all the way across. Now we always promise a customer when we come to sand their deck that we're going to sand the top rail, and they can opt in for the floor sanding. So the horizontal surfaces are what we promise. We don't promise them that we're going to sand any vertical surfaces. However, what I expect of the guys that work for me is to go ahead and hit these areas that you can see on the face. It's going to help a lot, and it's going to take minimal time. So this sander here has a trigger here. It has a switch, a locking mechanism that will lock the sander so it can operate without you having to hold the trigger down. And then it has a dial here that goes up to 5 and all the way down to 1. We're going to just keep it at 5 for sanding this deck. So we would sand this top rail, and then we're going to come around, and I'm just trying to knock off some of this furry stuff so that the stain finish looks a little bit more consistent. The reason why I don't promise vertical sanding as much is because we can't hit this side, we can't hit in between here with a hand sander. So instead of trying to explain that to a customer, I just say that we don't do it, but then we end up doing it so that maybe they're a little bit pleasantly surprised by the fact that we ended up spending a little bit of time sanding that surface. So I'll just kind of show you what I will do for this section of railing right here. Okay, so now I move on to the next section, and since I'm done floor sanding, we're going to get 2 of these hand sanders out so we can get this wrapped up, get all the dust blown off so we can start sanding. Okay, so the whole deck is sanded. I'm going to get it blown off with this leaf blower. Then we'll get all the drop cloth set up so that we can start sanding. So I'm just going to show you how I'm doing this. Probably just split the deck up into 2 pieces, blow that half off, and blow this half off. Might kind of hit the screens and the siding a little bit too, and make sure that there's no dust on that surface. So let's start it here. one thing about this leaf blower, to make sure that this cord doesn't come unplugged right here, you just kind of hook your cord in behind here and then plug it in. Alright, so I'm going to get started on staining now. I have two different brushes that I typically use for a deck. I use like a 3-inch or a 2-inch brush, oil brush that's a little bit thinner, like this, and then I'll use the thicker deck brush. This thicker deck brush, it's a 4.5-inch, I believe. We pick these up at Hirschfield's. They have it at Sherwin-Williams too, and I think even Home Depot, but we'll use that for the majority of the deck, and then just for the tight areas like in here, since this post is built, and then there's a tight little area right there where the fascia, the skirt board on this deck needs to get stained. We'll use that brush. As far as the setup goes for the person working on the outside, they're just going to be using this multi-ladder, have it extended however which way you need to make it so that you can get the top and this whole area stained. And you're going to use a ladder hook and just kind of hook it around this part that compresses on this ladder. And then we have the pivot tool down there. We have 3 points of contact on the ground, and then one point where we need the pivot tool because otherwise it's going to teeter. So we always use that pivot tool around the deck if we have to. So I'll just go ahead and get started with getting this outside stain. I'm just wetting the bristles in the first inch or so of the brush, and then staining. Now this will probably take a couple of passes to get this right. And then when you're up along this side, you kind of just take the brush and try to get it the best you can by getting the outside of these bristles wet and then pushing it up along that side. It's something that you're not going to see, but we want to try to seal that as much as we can here. Come up under here. One of the reasons for using this drop or this plastic is that you can stain over here a little bit more freely and not have to worry about getting on the siding. So at this point, I'm ready to kind of start using the other brush. I'm gonna go inside this. Spot right here and just wipe the siding down. A little bit of thinner. This rag was kind of pre-soaked with a little bit of thinner. And just make sure that's cleaned up right there. And I'll go ahead and start staining. So see that a brush, see all that stain that just kind of flew down right there? That's another reason for using the drop or the plastic sheet on the house. You don't have to worry about that. But as these brushes go bad, which this one is bad, it needs to get replaced. It just starts releasing the stain a lot easier. It doesn't hold it as well, and it holds up for a long time though. I mean, probably 2 months of constant work. So I'm on the outside, and I'm going to be kind of working with the person on the inside. We're both going to be kind of staining boards like this together. The person on the inside might get it, and I on the outside will get it. And what we're doing is we're kind of watching for each other's drips. If there's any excess area, we're kind of checking over each other's work as we stain. So I kind of hit that from this side, and the other person on the outside is going to kind of hit it, maybe a little bit, check over it with a dry brush. And you know, I'm going to be staining this part of this board, the underside of this board as well, and then I'll be staining the underside of this and this. The person on the inside will be staining the outside of this and the top rail. When you stain the top rail, a lot of times stain will come over this edge and drip. So that person on the inside is kind of responsible for doing that all at once. The person on the outside wouldn't really be doing that. Now, the person on the outside is also making sure that they hit this part. So I'm going to be going through here and hitting it like this. You see all that stain coming out here? Kind of work with it like that, try and get some of the excess off if you have to. And then the person on the inside is going to go ahead and stain their side as well, because there's a little lip on the outside of that spindle that needs to get hit too. Key when you're staining is just to make sure that you check over your stuff, because stain will start to pool and rest in areas, and then that cool resting spot will become a drip later on. It could take a few minutes. That's why you have to check over it. I'm making sure I'm getting the bottoms of these posts here. And then I'll get this skirt board stained. Staining, you want to make sure that you go from end to end and you don't have areas where you're stopping. The TWP is really forgiving stain, meaning it doesn't flash very easily. But since I started this skirt board, I'm going to start it from over here and finish over here, so I don't have any lap marks and it's a bit more consistent. The brush is getting a little bit easier to work with now that I've kind of worked out some of the thinner that was in there, and I'm just kind of dipping the first quarter inch or so of the brush, because I think it had gotten dipped about that much, so the brush is super saturated. So now it's becoming a little bit easier to work with. Don't worry about getting stain necessarily on the spindles right now, because all these spindles need to be picked out as you stain. The last thing you're going to do before you finish this section is you're going to wipe everything down. So I got everything pretty much stained now. So I'm gonna go ahead and just check over my work, make sure everything is covered. Yeah. Make sure all this is covered, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do my cleanup here. Okay, so there's a little bit of stain that released and got up on the house right here, so I'm just gonna take a rag, it's got some thinner on it, get that siding cleaned up. And then I'm also gonna clean that off with some water right now. Before I do that, these spindles, each one of these spindles needs to get wiped down because we're gonna get stain on there, and there's also gonna be some fibers left over from pressure washing. So basically you just work with your partner, you come through here and get each one of these spindles cleaned off. It's been a little bit, and you can see that there's a drip right here, just something that overflowed, so I'm going to clean that up. The stain is kind of settled in a little bit more, so you can see any spots where there may be drips. You can clean up right now, but this looks pretty good. So I would move on to the next section. The person on the inside would be working along with me, and we would be kind of working together. So I think we'll show that in a little bit of what it looks like, you know, as you're working on a section together. And you're working together with your partner on the outside, and one person's on the inside. The person on the inside is taking care of everything here that you can see, the upper part of this, rinsing the railings off or cleaning them off with thinner. Just get a little bit of thinner on the rag after you're done with the section and wipe off each rail. And the person on the outside is doing the same thing, and if they need a little bit of thinner on their rag, you just they just hand you over the rag, you kind of douse it a little bit so that they can wipe their section off. And then once I get past up until this side, I'm going to go ahead and do this top rail. So I'll do this piece, and this piece last all together, and the top rail gets double coated wet on wet. And then you work with the drop cloth as you're staining, just because you don't want to get a lot of drips on the floor while you're staining, because you might see those drips a little bit afterwards. When you go to stain the floor, those might show through because you're kind of getting like 3 coats almost at that point. So I'm going to slide this over here. So I can start doing this section right here. And you don't want to get too far ahead of your partner, because the idea is that everything's kind of getting stained at the same time so it looks uniform. Versus like if you were to stop right here and then come back an hour later and stain that, you might see like a little bit of a line here where I stopped, and it's kind of the stuff that he has to get to. So you don't want to work too far ahead. If you get ahead of him, you can maybe stain the pillars underneath, or if you get to the point where you're done with the railings, you can start on the floor while they finish up on the railings on the outside. So you're always trying to look for something to do, but you just want to make sure that you're not working too far ahead. The person on the outside has a little bit busier of a day. They have to work a little bit harder to keep up because of the fact that they have to move the ladder around. So I'll show you kind of what I'm doing here. Section, and dipping the brush about that much right there into the stain. You don't want to go too much, otherwise you're going to have too much stain that's going to drip off to work with. I'm going to hit this right here, and that's going to leave a bunch left over for him to hit in a little bit here when we get to that section. always hit about half of this post, and he's going to get the other half since this plastic spindle is in the way. Just to kind of finish off the other side of it. Now I have to do the top and bottom of the 2x4. And I'm going to be getting stain on the plastic spindle here, which is okay because everything's going to get wiped down. And he's going to be, I'm getting this side of this spindle and he's getting the other side of it when he works. You can see this section. Clean everything up, make sure you don't have any rips. And when you're working on the inside person is kind of going to be working on this section, but then kind of going back to the beginning and checking over the railings to make sure that there wasn't any like areas where the stain kind of sat in a knot hole, collected, and then it created a drip. Sometimes those drips don't rebuild themselves for 10 to 15 minutes. So you're going to have to go back over your work and just make sure that as consistent as it can be. So I would do that, and I would go ahead and get these railings wiped down this section. If you're working on a deck that has a lot of stain previously on the railings from somebody else that had stained the deck, it's a good idea to take a picture of that kind of thing before you get started, just because that stain that's hardened over several years will be nearly impossible at this point in time to get off. So we want to make sure that the customer understands that it wasn't something that we had done, and that the best way to prove that is just to take a picture of it and show the customer. So I got that side of it wiped out. I'm just going to go ahead and stain the top rail here, drink cap. I'm going to stain the top of it all the way across, and you're going to get some rollover here as you're staining, most likely as you're staining. It's going to roll over this edge, so I'm not going to stain this outside lip, this half-inch lip, until I'm done with this top board and everything. So now I'll go ahead and get this from the outside here. When you're staining this top rail, you might have some stain that comes over the edge. So it's important that you're staining this rail as your outside guy is kind of working with you, because if you go back and try to do it from the beginning, he may have moved drop cloths. And if he's moved drop cloths, it means that it's not protected, so the stain that falls over the edge might get on the cement. So we want to try to prevent that. So here's another spot. You always see this where the railings meet up with each other for the stairs, and the railings up on the deck, where you have these tight areas in here to do. Don't force this with this brush. It's too big, too thick, so you'd always want to take your smaller 2.5 inch brush and just kind of work it into this corner area. That should be good for now. I'll probably need to use it when I get onto the stairs and do the other side of these railings. Okay, so we're ready to start staining the floor. The railings are all done, checked it out, looked at all the angles, everything's covered, cleaned up all the spindles. we already took the plastic off, so you just take this upper half off. We can take the lower half down once we get down there, but we're done with this plastic, so we can take it off right now. As far as the stain application goes, you work with 2 people side by side. So one person will kind of be doing that half of the deck, and the other person will be doing this half of the deck. And what we're going to do is a 2-coat wet on wet system, and that is done by doing, say we're gonna start by doing 8 boards, and then once we get done with the 8th board, we're going to go back to the first board and do 4 boards and stain those again. Then we're going to leave these 4 boards, we're going to go to the next 4, do those 4 boards, and then go back to the previous 4 and stain those again. So that's how we kind of do the 2 coats wet on wet. That's kind of the best way to get the most longevity out of the stain. Make sure you saturate it enough, but also so that you don't want it to dry, because if it dries and it starts getting glossy and inconsistent looking. The TWP stain that we use is a lot more forgiving than, say, the Sickens product or Super Deck product. Those products, when you're staining them, you really only want to do 4 boards and then go back to the previous 2. You have less time as far as dry time in between doing your 2 coats wet on wet. You couldn't do the 8 and go back to the previous 4, because those previous 4 you're going to start probably getting some glossy patches. So I will just kind of show you what I'm going to do. Since I'm working by myself, my partner's doing the camera, I'm going to just work by myself and do a whole stretch, a whole row. And then I'll set the camera up so you can see how we would work together to do this for you, because it's a lot easier with 2 people. So kind of just manipulate the brush and try to get on the edges, cut the edges without globbing stain on the railings. At this point, you get a bunch of stain on the railings, it'll show up as a kind of a glossy spot. So you want to avoid hitting what you've already stained. And these bristles on this brush are thick enough where you can kind of work it in between the boards here like that, to get in between the boards so you don't see any white areas. Now when I'm staining this, every deck's built a little bit different, but these boards hang over the skirt board. So I'm going to have to go check the skirt board at the end after I've stained the floor, to see if there's any rollover. The rollover is just going to look like a drip, so I would just take a rag and clean those areas up afterwards. And I will just I'll show that once we get to that, once we get the floor done here. Now we have drop cloths laid out everywhere underneath, so everything is completely covered right now. So I'm putting quite a bit of stain on this deck, and a decent amount is going to be dripping down underneath for sure. You can see that there's always a lot of wet material that I'm moving around here. I'm not ever dry brushing this deck. I want to make sure that we get a lot of stain on the floor here. We also keep the small handheld brush on the deck with us. So if there's any tight areas up next to the house that kind of need to be cut in a little bit more detailed, then you want to use that brush. So that's kind of how you would apply it. Now I'm going to show you how we would work together as a team. If I have to put this brush down, I'm not going to want to set it down like this or rest it up against there, because that brush is going to leave a possible dark spot. So you want to just rest your brushes like that on your gallon. So we'll get set up working with 2 people, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So I kind of mark where my spot is right here. That's going to be 8 boards, so I'm going to work out to here. And then I'm going to stain the previous 4, and then move this gallon out to the next 4, so I know that these new ones are going to get stained, and then the previous 4 have to get double coated. And we'll just start on our ends and then kind of work towards the middle to meet each other here. If you're working on a really big deck, this deck is pretty average size. We may not have enough drop cloths to cover the entire deck at once, so you would just know that, you know, half the deck floor would be covered. You would get that sand and then just shift your drop cloths over as you're working. Notice that when I'm dipping this brush into this bucket, I'm not going straight in. So a lot of times what you'll do is you'll hit the edge of this and push down, and it might flick up stain. And if you're close to the house, it'll flick up stain to the house. So I always go into the bucket like this, where I hit the bristles on this side, and then once it's on halfway up the bristles, I'll go down into the bucket like that. Sometimes people can't take their grill off. We always ask that homeowners take everything off the deck before we start working on them, but they can't take the grill off. So maybe they have a grass grill, or maybe the grill is just really big and they don't want to remove it. So what we'll do in that situation is we'll just move the grill around as we're pressure washing. We'll move it back and forth. You have to pick it up. You can't roll it because it'll leave roller marks. So you pick it up and place it in places. And then when you come back to stain the deck, you want to stain half the deck, double coat it, let it dry for about 20 minutes. After it's dry for 20 minutes, pick the grill up and place it onto the stained area. So for 20 minutes you could go stain the pillars or do something else. So now we're going to go back to our previous four, our first set of four, and double coat those. And you just walk right on the floor, which is fine. You can see that now it's absorbing stain again, a decent amount. The second coat goes a lot faster, so I just do 4 all at once, all the way across. And since this is the last time you're going to be touching it with a brush, you're going to want to go through each row and just go from end to end all the way. Make sure that you don't have any pools of stain that are going to be glossy on the surface. So you get a nice consistent finish. Okay. So those 4 boards are done. Now we'll go on to our next 4. We'll get these stained for the first time. Once these are stained, we'll go back and double coat our previous board. Okay, so we've stained the majority of the deck here. We're kind of working our way up next to the house. There's some tight areas in here that I'm going to use the smaller 3-inch brush. And then once I get to this stretch, I can just use the regular deck brush and I'll be able to cut it in from while I'm standing. So I'll just kind of show how I do that. But what I'm trying to do here is, we can't do 4 boards and then go back to the previous 4. We have 6 left. So we're actually going to do these remainders, the last 6. And remember that these 4 still needs to be double coated. So we'll hit these, then we'll double coat these, and then one person's going to come back and double coat this while somebody else works on the stairs. So those kind of work their way from this way back down to the steps. So I'll just kind of show what I would do with this brush here. It's not very difficult, but when you're cutting with stain, it's really easy because it just, you put it down and it kind of flows into the corner that you have to stain, versus paint you have to go back and forth, and it takes a little bit more brush tooling to kind of get it into the surface to cover. Stain's not quite like that. Okay, so I cut that in over there with the little brush. So here's what I would do with this bigger brush. It's, again, really easy to cut in with this brush. You just have to be slow as you're staining. If you get any stain on the siding, make sure you clean it up with a rag. You want to work a lot slower and methodical when you're up next to the house. You try to work fast. That's when a mistake will happen. Say you go in for a dip here and you hit this side, it's a good chance you're going to spray a bunch of stain on the house. So just be slow, you know, dip your brush like this into the corner. It'll save you in the long run if you just kind of work slow as you get closer to the house. And you're backing up, backing your way out of the deck to stain it. Just want to make sure that you don't leave any puddles of stain anywhere. So on your once you've gotten your second coat applied, you have a relatively dry brush, and you kind of just reach out as far as you can and lightly just come back over the top of it. So now I can back myself off of this deck here, getting a second coat on all of this. Okay, so now we're working on the steps, and with the steps I basically just do about 3 steps. For the first coat, go back and then double coat the previous 3. So these 3 steps need to be double coated, but I'm going to go ahead and hit these and then come back up there and hit those. So just going to show you what I would do for these steps. I screw in the short handle here. I don't need it for this part. I'm trying to be careful not to get it to stain on the surfaces that I've already stained. If I do, it's not that big a deal. You just take a rag and kind of wipe it off. Those spots that you hit, you'll be able to see just look a little bit inconsistent. I'll show you an example of that. Like if I were to go like that and stain that and leave it, it's going to dry like that, so you're going to see it. You would just want to take your rag, always have a rag with you, and just kind of wipe it off like that. Move on to this next step, do 2 more, and then come back up, walk on that surface, do those 3, and then continue until I'm done here. We'll get everything cleaned up. Okay, so now we're on to the pillars. I've already stained these 2 pillars, and then we have to do the cross beam as well. There's another pillar over there. So you got to get these stained. I'm just going to use the big deck brush, and I'll use the extension on here as well. And it's simple, just get it put on here. And then you kind of just cut your edge in where it meets up with your concrete footing there. And then do the same thing with this cross beam here. We'll do this all the way across. Trying to get the brush kind of perpendicular to the cross beam, because when you load it up like that and you have it like this, trying to brush it doesn't work as well, and a lot of stain wants to come out of the brush. You want to get it kind of like this. Get this. Push that. After these pillars are all done, I get done with the cross beam, I'm going to look over these again. If you come up closer, because these cross beams have a lot of cracks in them, you'll see the stain will kind of get in there and it'll work its way out and kind of look a little uneven. So after it's dry, you just take a dry brush and make sure that those drips are kind of brushed out and go over all of them again. You can see some more on this piece right here too. So I just kind of brush this out quick. You won't see those right away. It's gotta, stain's gonna dry for a little while before they'll show up. So we'll get this crossbeam brushed out, that pillar, and then we'll get everything cleaned up. Okay, so we just finished staining the deck. Now the very final thing that we're gonna do is, one, we're gonna leave a little bit of stain left over for the homeowner. We have about that much of a gallon left over. For something like TWP, it's a box stain. We're going to use this color again, or if we have a full gallon, we're going to return it. But we want to leave a little bit with them if they want to do touch-ups of any kind, or have something else that they want to stain, or just want to keep it for the records. If it's a custom tint like Super Deck, semi-transparent stain, any leftover, leave the whole thing with the customer, because that's specific to their color, and we can't use that for anybody else's deck. Before we leave, I'm going to check the siding. When we drop the stain, it may come down. We have a bump out here, so we don't really have to worry about it here. But on some decks, if the deck floor went right up to the side of the house, you might see a drop of stain, like near the window here or something. So you want to check out everything on the side of the house. Make sure that there's no stain on anything. It looks like there's a little bit of stain here, but this is one of those situations where this deck has been stained probably 5 times over the years, and that's the kind of thing where we kind of battle with other people that have possibly gotten stains on the siding. So we know that we masked this off here. We didn't get any stain there, but there's a little bit left on here from a previous job that had been done, and this stuff, if this stuff was us, it would wipe right off. So I'm checking out the rest of the siding here, this downspout. We masked this downspout off, so we shouldn't have any issues with this. But if we do, just make sure you wipe it up. Get that cleaned off. Check the rocks. This whole area was covered with drop sheets right here, so another spot that was previously on there. This whole area was covered with drop cloths, so we really shouldn't have anything to worry about. But you know, I'm going to check around the sides here just in case. I also use a wire brush to clean up cement if it hasn't been finished with like a sealer. Some concrete patios are sealed with like a stain or whatever, and you don't want to use a wire brush on that surface because you don't want to damage the stained concrete. That'd be expensive to fix. But if it's just concrete like this, you could just take a wire brush to it to clean it off, or like a rock or something like that, that's okay. But if it's like a stained concrete surface like that, then you're going to want to just take a rag and gently clean it. It should just wipe right off because it's a non-porous surface. So I'll kind of check these out. Let me put a little bit thinner here. Get this cleaned up around here. It looks like there's a little bit of stain these out. Maybe a little bit right here. A little bit on that rock. Cleaning that rock off. And that should be pretty much it. There's a spot right here. Just going to take a rag and kind of wipe this spot off of this rock. And the rest of it looks good, so I'm going to check everything out, make sure everything looks good. Leave the same with the customer, and then this job should be a wrap. We'll invoice the client soon here, and if they have any questions they can get a hold of me later, but that pretty much concludes the video for deck restoration.